We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Free Association Radio. This is Robert Phoenix. It's Friday and fall has arrived here in Texas. Thank God. That's all I've got to say. Like, the hot weather was really cool for about 3 weeks when I first got here. It's like, oh yeah, this is great. Yeah. I was playing my swamp boogie music coming from my car. Tony Joe White, stuff like that. Getting into the heat. The boogie of the heat. The call of the bullfrog at night. Crickets. The hum of creation in the air. And that was about 3 weeks. And after that, I was like, okay. I said, oh, is this hot? And then I'd be talking to people who live here, and their response would be, wow, we're having really a pretty mild summer. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. This is mild? You people are insane. Absolutely insane. And then sometime in August, it was feeling like we were Lawrence of Arabia trekking through the desert to ambush the Turks. That's what it felt like. And it was just get to the other side. And then finally there was this moment of surrender where you don't care anymore. I don't care. I'll sweat. I don't care. I'll change my shirt 3 times a day. And just when you get to the moment of surrender, it changes. And we get a cool breeze happening. It feels good. It feels good now. Anyway, today is Friday the 13th. Thank you for joining the show. And we're going to be blessed with 2 of the planet's most avid and vigilant watchdogs in terms of the environment. And they are holding up basically 2 ends of the country, one focused on the Pacific and the other focused on the Gulf and the Atlantic. And I'm talking Michael Edward and our friend RadChick from Michigan. And we're going to be talking about the Gulf of Mexico and what's happened there and what continues to happen. Michael is all over. It has been for a long time. It's been a while since BP lost its big rig, the Macondo well. And Michael was one of the first people on this in a way that was utterly mind-blowing. I mean, he was light years. I mean, light years ahead of everyone else. Not only in terms of the reporting, but also in terms of what Corexit was in what it was doing to the ocean and ultimately what it was doing to humans and still continues to do to humans. So we're going to get an update on the Gulf from Michael and find out what's happening. And not just what's happening, but what people can do. I can't tell you how many times I get phone calls from clients who live in and around Florida who are sick. More people call me from Florida who are sick or suffering health problems. So I hope that Michael might have some insight into that. He's a gifted healer. He's a Virgo. What do you expect? And he'll be able to hopefully key us in on some things that can keep us healthy, especially if you live in the state of Florida. So if you live in the Sunshine State, listen on. Hour number 2, we're bringing on RadChick, and she's going to get down into Fukushima. We're going to talk about the ice wall, what that's all about, if it's just a smokescreen or if it might even be effective. And we're going to get into radiation counts of bluefin tuna. And I was talking with Katie Galante the other night, and we were discussing how women in California are starting to go into menopause just after the age of 30. Yes, it's true. It's mind-blowing, but their cycles are being sped up. And we're going to get into this with RadChick and see if she's heard anything about this as well. So it's 2 hours of doom, gloom, and redemption here on Friday the 13th. It's not a bad day, Friday the 13th. It is not. The only reason it has a negative connotation is because this is the day that the Knights Templar were slaughtered in the south of France, actually October 13th, 1307. And one of the people that was slaughtered, of course, was Jacques de Molay, killed. Some people think he died in March, that he was in prison and he died later in March. I think he probably died in 1307, October 13th. And so therefore a curse was put upon the world in the Gregorian calendar as a result of the massacre of the Knights Templar. And of course, as a result, we have the Da Vinci Code. All right, somebody's calling in from another country. Maybe this is Michael. I just have to find out. I have to check in. Let's just see. Hello?
Hello?
Is this Michael?
Yes. It shows another country?
It shows you calling up with a different country code, man.
Oh, well, Skype is odd.
It is odd. So maybe you've been rerouted through, who knows, Marrakesh or someplace like that.
Well, I could be anywhere, I suppose.
So what's going on, my friend? How are you?
All right. Dealing with things that you know a little bit about and been kind of concentrated outside of things with the Gulf, which you're aware of. But no, this is kind of a little refresher, and it was really kind of good for me that you decided you wanted me on Friday the 13th, which, by the way, it's a great day for me. It's always very progressive. So, all the superstition, forget that. Friday the 13th is a strong day.
Yeah, I think in my life I've only had one terrible Friday the 13th, and I think I might have been a teenager, and I think I probably just invoked it, with my fresh teenage mind. Before we get into the Gulf, Michael, I know that this is a very sensitive subject for you, and I don't want to get into it too deeply, but there are also people out there that know what's happened in your life. And I just want to know if there's any way that you can share at a very high level with people that are concerned about you and what's taken place, any sort of positivity that you can bring to that experience so that people can, just from their own perspective and what they kind of know, can say, okay, I feel like Michael is handling this, and I feel like, he's kind of on top of it and working with it. Is there anything you can share to those people that you'd like to share?
Yeah, just don't ever give up. When so-called experts will tell you one thing, and in your heart that it's just not jiving, it's not meshing, it's not following what they say. It's kind of like, mainstream media. Everything happens in the world, it's all just a dog and pony show. And when it comes to murder investigations, I found out in this day and age, it's about the same thing. And unless there's some kind of a inside connection, most murders aren't going to be investigated. And then it falls on the family because you know that things just aren't adding up. And that's what's happened in my case, where we had absolutely no cooperation. The murder of my son from the sheriff's investigators. We even went up to Georgia Bureau of Investigation and got pretty much zero cooperation. So we had to do it on our own. My daughter and I have been really working on it hard, and we found evidence and things in blood tests that they didn't reveal, mistakes made during autopsy, evidence left at the scene that's in the crime scene photos. Just amazing. I guess my whole point with this, if anything ever touches your own family, where there's something like a death that's unusual, or even an illness, even hospital stays, because just went through that with my wife's niece. Don't take for granted what people tell you. If it doesn't seem right, then you're probably right. And look into it. It never hurts to look into anything. Look into it, and you just might find out your intuition or what spirit is telling you, or however you're getting the message. If you look into it, you'll find out that you're right. And I would say 100% of the time. Otherwise, you wouldn't have that nagging at you. It was really hard at first for me because with my son, they tried to say it was a suicide. And then in my research, I come to find out, well, that particular county in Georgia has the highest suicide rate per capita of the entire state, and yet it's just a little redneck county. And that's because if you aren't killed in a car accident or you don't die under a doctor care in a hospital or a nursing home, basically you're a suicide. Even if somebody were to blow the back of your skull off, which was another case outside of my son's, they ruled that a suicide because he was found in a pond for a week. My advice is, if you feel that something isn't right, pursue it, and you'll find the truth. And that's the whole point. We have to find the truth. It's the same thing with the golf. And Robert, you know how much I worked on that with Lynn and the thousands of hours we put into it. But as for me, we'll just leave it at that I'm pursuing the truth. It's going to go into federal levels. We're probably going to take down an entire sheriff's department.
Well, Michael, whether it's your personal life or the Gulf of Mexico, your courage and your heart continue to be an inspiration to me and other people. So just thank you for being on the planet. And let's transition into the Gulf then. When you and I first started doing this, you were way out ahead of the pack. I mean, there was nobody doing the type of research that you were doing. I mean, people that were dialed in on the alternative research level and all the different channels were posting your material and championing your work. And here we are. How long has it been? Has it been about 3 years now? Is that right?
Yeah, since Deepwater Horizon well number 3 blew up into a volcano of oil. And that's another thing. I've already gotten proof of 3 wells instead of 1. And it's just been such an absolute cover-up. It's unreal. Yeah, there's so much, Robert, but you know what? You're right about one point. I was kind of on the leading edge and didn't know it. I was somehow got steered in the right directions with things. I guess it's kind of what I just said about, dealing with the death and investigation of my son's murder. It's the same thing. When you know something's out of place, you've got to dig. And that's what I did. And stuff was just coming up like crazy back in 2010. After it happened, it just grew from there. And then we would find things like reports from British broadcasting that were not aired in the U.S. things like saying there's a new form of microbiology, and this is coming from a BP spokesman. Real obvious things like that our media wasn't telling us. So then I decided, all right, I'm not a scientist, but you know what? I can read. I can look up scientific journals. If I don't know a word, I can find out what that word means. And that's basically where it just started to snowball, finding out that there was a new bacteria that was introduced into the Gulf. Of course, they tried to say for some reason the oil made an indigenous bacteria want to eat the oil more. The problem is now I've got scientific reports from right here in the U.S. that show there's a new genus of a certain bacteria, and it's the one that I actually named. So here it did the round circle, Robert. You're the one who said that there was going to be the day, and I think this is back late 2010, either the first or second time I was on your show, and you said there's going to come a day when everybody will realize what I had said is true. Well, now I've got scientific proof outside of my own research, and it did come round circle, exactly what you said.
So let's go back in time. We've got a massive explosion, 3 wells, and there are much more passive and safe remedies, forms for bioremediation in the Gulf, and yet BP, who had just acquired the company Nalco, which was the producer of Corexit, they chose to dump, how many gallons would you estimate of Corexit into the Gulf, Michael?
I think they tried to say like 1.2 million gallons, but it's still ongoing, so who knows how much. And the reason I say that is the airplanes are still flying. They got a little island in the Gulf. I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's been a while. But basically BP bought most of that little island. I think it's off Mississippi or Alabama, I can't remember. But they still have their C-130s spraying what they're calling Corexit 9500 or 9527 or 27A. That's all part of the dog and pony show, because I've got a scientific report that pretty much tells you what the Corexit was all about. It was to enhance the new bacteria that they put in there to eat the oil and the gas. It's an enhancer. It's like nutrients. And I did mention that back at the end of 2010, but now I got their testing shows it.
So now we've got this new organism, this new species that has been introduced into the Gulf of Mexico. It's proliferating to this day. What are some of the environmental impacts that you've seen? We saw people early on getting sick. What have you tracked since then in terms of how this has impacted people in and around the Gulf?
I would say the single most prevalent problem is the new type of fungus that's developed from it. This is all directly going back to this lab-created 88 to 92% DNA of a previously known type of bacteria that was found in Antarctica that eats oil. Well, what's happened is when you create anything in a laboratory, when it comes to genetics, you have a problem with what's called horizontal gene transfer. And what that means is if your lab-created bacteria or virus, if it contacts another organism outside of its own species, it affects it. Okay, it actually affects it, not that it mutates it, it actually changes the DNA of what it touches. And this is the danger of lab genetics, so to speak. Okay, it's one thing to splice and dice genes, where you're taking two organisms and you're going to see if you can come up with a new one. It's almost like, what you do with trees, and you come up with a new subspecies of a fruit tree. Okay, that we know that the dangers are slim to none. But when you're creating a genetic code and you're using a medium to make that genetic code create an organism, then you have horizontal gene transfer. This is what the scientists in Europe have known. And I'm sure that even those in the U.S. have known it as well, but they're not paying attention to it. Here we have people like Craig Ventnor. I mean, he's a maniac. He just thinks everything should be genetically changed. In Europe, they know different, and they're testing everywhere from Russia to Spain. I've been contacted by different scientists over the past 3 years, and they've all said the same thing. The ones in Europe and even in South America said, we all know that if we do these genes, create new organisms, genetically modify them, that they're going to touch everything that they come in contact with and change the genetic structure of everything they touch. And that's the reason they just kicked Monsanto out of Europe. That's the bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
So they thought they were so smart, and in order to cover up their big mistake in the Gulf of Mexico, try to tell everybody they only dug one well when they dug three, and put on those underwater cameras, the second well, which still had the riser there, which was slightly leaking, and just unbelievable how they tried to cover it up. But the worst part is they destroyed the biosphere around the Gulf of Mexico, and it's going worldwide.
So if you were to advise somebody in a place like Alabama or Louisiana or Florida or even Texas, would you, A, advise them to stay out of the water, or B, to stay away from any kind of seafood or shellfish from the Gulf? What would you tell those people?
Well, there's not that much seafood or fish coming out of the Gulf. I know fishermen here. I don't know what it's like up by Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana anymore. My wife's cousin, who used to have a shrimp boat, he went out of business more than 2 years ago. So I haven't kept up with that, but I can tell you that the fishermen down here in the southwest of Florida, they refuse to go out in the Gulf. They're doing all their shrimping in the Caribbean and out around Key West, simply because they say there's hardly anything here. Second of all, they don't trust it because they've seen too many funky-looking shrimp and fish, with ulcers and everything else. And that is exactly what's happening to people. It's the same thing. Besides the fungus, I'll read you a report about that too, just so I can back this up with some facts for your listeners. We've got new microorganisms and new bacteria that are starting to show up now and affect all of us. A lot of people complain where they have rashes that they can't get rid of, boils, things that look like cysts, ulcers, threads. It looks like threads growing out of their skin and everything else. Well, right. This is all reaction to new genetics that our immune system doesn't know how to handle. So this is some pretty far-reaching, nasty stuff. I've got a problem where, I run an animal sanctuary, and it's mostly horses. All right, I've had for the past 3 years fungus infections on horses. It drives them crazy. Even the dogs, it's the same problem. And it's especially when we get a rainstorm comes in from the Gulf. And then they're just itching, and it just drives them crazy. So typically with fungus, the way you'll get rid of it is something with a sulfur base or some kind of sulfur drug, which is only for animals. Humans can't take that. Well, we can, but they outlawed it. And that usually kills fungus. Well, guess what? This fungus thrives on sulfur. So I found out the hard way, you can't treat this traditionally. This new variants of fungus are actually thriving on the sulfur that normally kills it. And I thought, okay, that's odd, but then I also remembered one of the byproducts of asphalt oil, which came out of the BP blowout, was sulfur, high levels of sulfur. So here we've got bacteria that were put in there that just love to eat sulfur. And, of course, now we've got a fungus that's come from this that's prevalent all over the Gulf area. And it perhaps might even be getting to the point of, we've got a problem in this past week with dengue fever in 2 counties. It's an epidemic. Now, I'm not saying, okay, that's definitely related, but dengue fever in Florida, which comes from a certain mosquito, all right, that's not normal. There was a small, I think it was 1 or 2 cases back when the Deepwater Horizon well originally started all its mess, and that was in Key West, I believe, but not in the middle of Florida. Here we've got St. Lucie County and another county adjoining it where there's 15 cases right now, dengue fever. This isn't normal. Nobody's importing the mosquitoes to do this.
Right.
So we've got a biological mess here. But Robert, before I get going off into other areas, let me back everything up. Okay, this is why I wanted to get on your show today, and I wanted to get it out of the things that I found out by their scientific testing here that backs up everything I said for the past 3 years. There's a study that came out from University of California Davis Genome Center, also the Hubbard Center for Genome Studies in New Hampshire, Department of Biological Sciences, Auburn University, and Department of Biology, University of Texas, San Antonio. They did a study back in October 2011, and it just got published in June 2012. So there's always a delay on this, but let me read the highlights. Our data suggests a considerable hidden initial impacts across the Gulf beaches may be ongoing despite the disappearance of visible surface oil. In other words, they're saying it's what you can't see that we see a problem with. So they go on to say most post-spill sites are overwhelmingly dominated by fungi. And that's why I brought that up about the fungus. Dominated, overwhelming. This is their words. Most post-spill sites are overwhelmingly dominated by fungi. So, I read that, and this is even after I had the problem with the animals, and I'm going, okay, well, that explains it, why traditional treatment against any kind of fungus, skin fungus, whatever, it's not working. Well, that's because it's one of these derivatives coming from the bacteria and all this genetic modified crap they put in the Gulf. Right, so then they go on to say developmental hindrances have prevented individual nematodes, which is really, the start of microbiology life in the Gulf. It's prohibited them from surviving to adulthood, and that the hydrocarbon-associated fungal communities are dominating all the other communities, even though the oil slicks are gone. Mm-hmm. Now, do you want to swim in the Gulf? I wouldn't even touch the beach. In fact, I really don't like living in Florida anymore. It's getting weird. Yeah. They say further evidence of taxonomic loss is also apparent in post-spill communities, prolonged community biases, I know all this technical talk, across microbial communities, could eventually translate into long-term effects for higher-level predators and food webs in the Gulf ecosystems. Let me translate that. The basic food sources, starting from the bottom, like zooplankton and things like that, they're thriving in juvenile stage, and some reason stops them from becoming to adulthood. So what it is they've destroyed the basis of the food chain in the Gulf of Mexico. So this is why long-term effect, you're not going to see the fish, you're not going to see the shrimp. Those are considered the predators of the smaller food. You're not going to see it because they're dying before adulthood, and that is the genetic modification.
Wow,
pretty sad.
This is absolutely frightening on a number of levels. I want to go back to what you said about sulfur, because outside of magnesium, sulfur seems to be the staff of life for us as humans. If we do not get, enough sulfur, we can also be deficient and succumb to all kinds of infections, and our immune system is not as strengthened and fortified. So sulfur is actually a really good thing, especially when it comes to fighting these infections, bacteria, fungi, and mold. And interestingly enough, they've engineered this fungus to be just as dependent on sulfur as we are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, don't you think it's a little odd that you have a fungus that does not respond to treatment with sulfur, but instead takes sulfur as a food source to make itself worse?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's the opposite of normal.
I find it fascinating, but I also find it fascinating that it mirrors our relationship to sulfur. So I'm wondering if there's some kind of transgenic modification in that fungus that contains something that is slightly carbon-based and human. I'm just throwing that out there.
Well, that would fit, and the reason it fits is because of the introduction of the lab-created genus of Oceanosporillus. Boy, it's been a long time since I said all these words, which was the indigenous natural species of oil-eating bacteria. But here they put their modified form in there, created in the lab. And before the hour is over, I'll read that report where they actually admit it. It's great. But yes, sulfur is an important role in oil as well as all of life. Yeah. And normally, sulfur will keep things in check. Example again with the horses and even with people. Sulfur normally, when you have an infection or you have any kind of skin rash or something that that's beyond just the normal heat rash type thing, and fungal infections, sulfur is an important part of putting that in check. But now here we've got fungi that actually thrive on the sulfur, and that's again carbon-based, just like you said. And it's taking it out of our bodies. This, to me, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, but out of common sense and logic, it explains all the rashes and all the problems with people around the Gulf.
So now we can rule out sulfur as an ally against the fungal invasion. Have you found anything that does work, Michael?
I've come up with a pretty good natural solution where I've planted and I'm growing neem trees, N-E-E-N. And I'm sure you've heard of neem oil and neem lotion. Well, that as a base has helped a lot to take the neem leaves. I shade dry them, and then I basically turn them into pulverized tiny little particles. I call it nano neem. Anyway, when I put that in with an aloe gel base, that seems to really keep it at bay with these fungal rashes and itches. It keeps it at bay long enough for the immune system to figure out how to deal with it. See, that's our problem. Our immune system doesn't know how to deal with it. So this is like a new age, a new world. It's a whole new biosphere, and our bodies have to learn. Our bodies are adaptable. They can learn it, but it takes time. So, to try to not find the cure. Our body is our own cure. Our immune system is our cure. We have to find out how to keep it at bay, to keep it at check. Whatever it is that's coming against us that our immune system has never dealt with before, our body will adapt. Our immune system will figure it out. Again, it takes time, but in the meantime, you've got to be able to try to treat the symptoms. And obviously, sulfur on this new fungi doesn't do it because it's like food. So the neem seems to do really, really well. The neem oil especially, if it's a bad enough case. I've got one horse. This is the third year in a row. And this year, I would say it's a quarter of the problem that it was the past 2 years. So it's not 100% gone, but his immune system is obviously learning how to handle it. And the neem seems to help. That's just one thing that I've found so far.
That's N-E-E-M, neem. Some people actually consume neem. Have you tried that, Michael?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I take neem all the time for my joints. It stops inflammation as well.
Okay.
I've got a 38-year-old horse out here that his joints are absolutely destroyed. We tried everything there was on the market and everything the vet tried. Nothing worked. And started giving him neem leaves that are, ground up and put it in his oats. And within 2 weeks, the swelling was gone. So, 38-year-old horse, rheumatoid arthritis doesn't disappear too quick. It worked. And it works with me. I've got 2 discs missing, and my joints aren't the best in the world after stupid young thinking when I was younger, and, you don't seem to want to care about what you do to yourself. Oh, well. Anyway, it makes a big difference, and it does get rid of the inflammation, and that is part of what this new modified fungus that's in different varieties, by the way. It's not just one. There's different forms of it that they've admitted that have come out of the Gulf, and of course it's from the oil-based. And why is it oil-based when it didn't ever do that before? Well, it's because we threw this lab-created Frankenstein genes in there in the form of bacteria to go eat the oil, all for the sake of eating oil, Robert. Forget us, forget the environment, forget the entire biosphere. Let's just make sure that we use whatever is necessary without testing it, without knowing the effects, to go eat up the oil. So everybody blames Corexit because the media says so. Corexit is just basically the food for their lab-created bacteria.
Right.
I said that from day one.
And what's to prevent BP or some other company, or perhaps even BP themselves, to somehow find an old oil rig somewhere which is almost out of production and have another malfunction or disaster and go in and do the exact same thing so they can sell more Corexit?
Mm-hmm. And like you said, BP owns Nalco, who was the manufacturer of Corexit. So things have changed. Corexit doesn't have the ingredient list they claimed it did from day one.
Right.
It's all just basically a lie. I mean, you tell a lie long enough, people will believe it.
Yeah.
Let me get to. I really want to get the facts out, Robert. I mean, you and I could talk about this forever. It's been a long time. Let me quote something that came out also in 2012 in the International Society for Microbial Ecology. It's called the ISME Journal. And this report was done by China universities, University of Oklahoma, Berkeley again, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, another China university. But let me just give the highlights of what they figured out. And they were studying the genetic changes in the Gulf of Mexico, microbial gene functions, as they put it, that were enriched, wrong word, but they say enriched with the Deepwater Horizon deep sea oil plumes. So here they are studying the plume samples. And first thing is, in the results column, they say functional gene changes. And you go, okay, functional gene changes. They say the microbial community functional structure was significantly different between the plume and the non-plume samples. So that basically says there was microbial activity going on within the plume that was not in the rest of the Gulf of Mexico. So there takes out, not their theory, what they keep trying to say is the truth, is that indigenous bacteria that eat oil all of a sudden just showed up in the Gulf of Mexico, but here they're saying that activity only showed up within the plume itself. It was not outside the plume. So you can't say it was indigenous.
Right. So
Then
let's stop there for a second. Do you think that this bacteria was released in the plume as kind of a fail-safe, and it's naturally occurring? Is that your kind of consensus around this?
Well, they took an indigenous bacteria, which does eat oil, and they modified it in the lab, and then they gave it food called Corexit and put it in the Gulf, especially in the plume, and that's where they dumped the most of this stuff. And that's why they found in the plume that this microbiological activity with functional genes was totally different than what was outside the plume. So you can't say
they inserted it. They inserted it into the plume.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
In fact, I had on my to back that up. I had on my site Gulf Blue Plague, blueplague.org. There was a man who worked out on one of the original boats, and he said the water was alive with these organisms. I'm trying to remember. Let me quote him right. The Gulf was alive and boiling, and he said that if I had fallen in the water, I would have been eaten alive. Now, this is a guy with I think, with 40 years experience out on the oil rig boats, and he was a crew leader. And they were right there at Deepwater Horizon trying to suck up some of the oil that was on the surface, and he freaked out. In fact, he got very sick from it as well. So, yeah, that backs it up right there just from one person who happened to see it.
Right.
Yeah, the water was alive. There have been other people that have said the same thing, but they wouldn't go on my show and wouldn't talk about it because everybody was scared.
Right. Wow.
All right, further in this report, the oil spill stimulated an increase in functional genes for hydrocarbon degrading. They're saying, okay, the oil spill did that, stimulated an increase in functional genes that degrade hydrocarbons. No, that just doesn't happen by itself. You don't all of a sudden have millions of gallons coming out of a crater in the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico and having all this gas and asphaltic oil. Nature doesn't say, oh my gosh, there's an oil spill over there. Let's all run over there and eat up the oil. It's just asinine for anybody to think that that's what really happened. But that's what they keep saying is, nature took care of it. No, there was, in previous tests, there was hardly any of that oil-eating or gas-eating bacteria in the Gulf, though in areas where they had some of the pipelines that had leaked, they saw a slight higher concentration than normal. And that would make sense, but not to the extent of what was in the oil plume, why this thing was doing its oil volcano deal for all those months. Right. There's something else. Do you remember on YouTube, there was this guy that put on there that this new microbe or whatever it was down there was eating the metal, the iron, on all the ribs and all that. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Okay. This test proved it. This is their testing. Iron reduction. I mean, I thought the guy myself, I really didn't suck into that, okay, I know it's a new form of microbiology made in the lab, and it's supposed to eat oil, but eat metal, eat iron? Okay, that was a little bit too far-fetched for me. Well, guess what? He was right. It was eating it. It's amazing. It's stuff. It's a food. It needed the iron.
Ugh. This is a horror story. I mean, this is an absolute Hollywood horror story.
Well, okay, then they said, I want to get through these reports because I'm quoting them, and these things you can find on the Internet. Hydrocarbon degrading coupled with metal reduction occurred in the deep water. Then there's something I used to talk about all the time on my show with Blue Plague. You can find them all on there, blueplague.org, that the bacteriophages, they had been altered. And then here they say, well, they were significantly stimulated. Okay, I love their terms. Then they go on to say deep-sea marine microbial communities underwent a dynamic change in response to the oil spill and associated geochemical changes. So that's kind of their little cover-up is like, oh, no, it came because of the oil spill. But, it was added. Then they say many functional genes involved in both the aerobic and anaerobic. What that is the gas, the aerobic and the anaerobic of the oil itself. Involved in aerobic and anaerobic degradation of various oil components are detected and or enriched only within the oil plume. Now, gee, isn't that odd? Functional genes representative of the order Oceanospirillus. And this is what made my hair almost jump up. I said that there's a new form of that particular microorganism, Oceanospirillus, and that's the one that normally eats oil, but it's I'll get into that just a sec. It appears to have significantly made the population higher in the plume samples compared to non-plume, although the dominance of that Oceanospirillus population consuming the oil in the plume was based on the clone library and sequence analysis with RNA genes. Well, I wrote an article about that, and I'll give you the page for it in a minute, but that was back in November 2010, and I identified it. And now here in 2012, they decided to let me know I was right. Let me see. I got to move ahead here. I got one more article, and this is the one. Again, this was 2012, International Society for Microbial Ecology. All these national and international universities involved with this study, and again, it's on the deep water oil. And then here's what they were saying. There's no information about what microorganisms were active or which functional genes were actually expressed in response to the oil spill. In other words, it's saying we don't know what's out there. Nobody's really studied it. So that's what we're going to do. So they say we aim to determine which functional genes and pathways were expressed in the deep sea plume of all that oil. But then, all their testing and all this, and it's kind of boring and lots of pages of technical stuff, but then you have to get down to the bottom where here's what they say. The 16S RNA gene sequences for our single cells were less than 88% similar to a single-celled Oceanospirillus species known as, again, it's been a long time since I had to say these words, Alcanovorax borcumensis.
My God.
He said it's similar to it, but less than 88% RNA similarity. So their conclusion was, thus, this represents a different genus within the Oceanospirillus family. In other words, a new organism.
Right.
Different genus. It's a new species.
The implications of that are absolutely mind-blowing. I'm talking with Michael Edward, who is and has been out on the cutting edge of what's happened in the Gulf of Mexico for the past 3 years, and just doing a summation here about some of the findings of the work that he did and the corroborations that the scientific community is now coming around and verifying. What really strikes me about some of these words is that they almost sound like spells or incantations when you think about it. These multisyllabic words, and astral metaphorical comediensis, and there's somebody over cauldron, and they're evoking this spirit in these organisms to some extent. I've got this theory, Michael, and you may want to chime in on this, but I have this theory that the whole goal here, whether it's genetically modified food, whether it's introducing a brand new organism into the Gulf, which will proliferate throughout probably most of the oceans of the United States and the world in general, or whether it's chemtrails and altering our blood as a result of the chemtrails, that the whole idea here is to recreate the planet, to recreate a new species. And in many ways, this is where we get into kind of the religious and spiritual and philosophical angle of this. It's because, and this is my theory, is that when there was the crucifixion, we had the crucifixion, and in my mind, and it's been this way for a long time, the crucifixion was this moment in linear time where there was a grounding of love and consciousness through every living being, every organism, every rock, every piece of, whether it's sentient or non-sentient matter on this planet. Something changed at that point, and everything was imbued with a conscious sort of realization of God in the universe throughout every molecule on the planet. And that, to me, was probably the most important either realization or metaphoric kind of example of the crucifixion. And when you get into the remodification of the planet, what you're doing is you're wiping all of that out. In essence, what's taking place here is the obliteration of God in the species, God in the biosphere, God in the rocks and the plants and the water and everything, and replaced by something different, replaced by something alien. I think that this is kind of where it's going. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd have to agree that it's reforming life from the wrong end. Okay, yeah, so we have the science that allows people like Craig Venter to basically create microorganisms and viruses. That's a lot of power. You could destroy the world with it, or perhaps you could help the world with it. I'm kind of mixed about that. I kind of agree with the scientists in Europe, especially in Spain, where any lab-created genetic anything, they know the danger of it. Here, they allowed it in the Gulf of Mexico without, you couldn't really test it. It would take years and years to see how it crosses species barriers. But that was the big warning that I kept saying. I'll bring it up again, horizontal gene transfer. They also call it lateral gene transfer. With a natural parasite, all the viruses and bacteria are limited by what they call species barriers. They don't intermix.
Right.
Artificial genetics, all this synthetic biology, that does cross the species barriers. So back to what you said, this is a change of life that they're forcing. It's a biological change. It's being forced on us. We don't have a choice. I look at this so much more dangerous than anything else. Chernobyl, Fukushima, okay, what happens when you have radiation? Well, it destroys cells. So what happens? You die, or possibly you have mutations and you look like a zombie or whatever if you make it that far. But basically that's destructive. What we're looking at here with what they started in the Gulf is life-changing.
Yeah.
Totally life-changing. Creating, a new species of humankind?
That's what it boils down to. I mean, that's what appears to be what's taking place. That we are
transgenic organisms. Transgenic. I mean, it pops from one to the other. Well, they don't know how it can come out in the end, because that's the one problem with synthetic DNA. They don't know the results. This species jumping from one to the other just by touching each other. And okay, I'm talking about microbiology and viruses and bacteria, but that's the building block of life. Whether it's a tree, whether it's you and I, whether it's animals, that is life. So they're changing it from the ground up. And for what purpose? Anybody can answer that. I'd like to hear some theories. It's got a spiritual part to it, just like you said.
My theory is to take us out of the divine ratio. That's what I think. It's to take us.
It's going to be effective.
So,
well, if they change the DNA, and DNA is connected to the supernatural, spiritual aspect of our creation and who we are and how we were made. So if you start altering that's exactly what's going on right now. And the biggest kickoff they had was the Gulf of Mexico, Deepwater Horizon. So now it's affecting all sorts of different species. That's the food we eat. Florida grows almost the full majority. California is in a tight race with Florida for the food grown. And now this stuff is in the air, in the soil, it's in the water, and it's affecting everything. So we're going to be affected even if somebody says they've grown organic food in their own garden here in Florida. It doesn't mean anything because it's already genetically modified. The air and the water prove it.
So, okay, short term, people can use some neem to deal with skin ulcerations or skin problems, take it internally. Maybe you can cut down some of the fungal growth inside the body. Do you have any solutions long term for people on this, Michael, or are you just still trying to figure it out as you go?
It's as I go. I don't have any one solution. There is something that I believe is a big help, and I'm not trying to plug a brand name or anything. It's just something I used even when I had intestinal cancer before all this BP stuff. And that it was basically for oxygenation for the cells so that they could fight it. And it's called cell food. And it's a little 1 ounce or ½ ounce bottle, and you take 24 drops a day, and this stuff helps the good cells strengthen with oxygen. It's got all minerals and everything else in it, and enzymes. It seems to help a lot, and I've even been using that. I've got a couple of lesions of weird things because I'm outside working almost all day, and I've had some stuff crop up in me in the last couple of months, and I'm even using it on this one, whatever it is that's trying to grow on my arm, which, by the way, fits what everybody else tells me when I talk to them from all around the Gulf. These things just pop up. But it seems to be, for a lack of a better description, burning it out. So I don't know what's in the cell food. Maybe the oxygenation doesn't allow it to thrive. But that's what I've come up with. Between neem, there's another leaf that really helps the immune system called moringa, M-O-R-I-N-G-A. And that helps build your immune system. We're not going to find a so-called pharmaceutical cure with this. It's because our bodies are trying to fight all this modification genetically going on with us. So the best that we can do to keep ourselves alive is boost our immune system in natural, good ways that our immune system will learn how to deal with it. It's like having a chicken pox as a kid. I had chicken pox, mumps, measles, the whole bit. Now they want to give you shots for it that don't work or turn you into autistic or whatever. It proves that, when I was a kid, when you had the chicken pox, it was very rarely anybody died with that. It was really rare, at least in this country.
Yeah.
And with the measles, the same thing. Because we had good food source and our immune systems were able to handle the virus. Well, we've got new viruses now. So we've got to keep our immune system as boosted as we can with good natural, good things, good minerals, all the basic building blocks our bodies need. We got to keep them boosted so our immune system can learn how to deal with these new microorganisms and fungi and everything else that they've put on us without asking.
Right. So let's just go over that list again. Neem, cell food, and moringa. Those are three good places to start, right?
Yeah, I also take iodine. Of course, some of that is because of Fukushima, but I take it's like what's the name of it? Lugoil oil or whatever. Yeah, that's it. I take that just because that also is great for antibacterial. I don't want my immune system to get compromised any more than it is with all this new stuff. So, to keep it going, I also take silver. Again, that's to help protect my immune system so it doesn't get weakened. And that I'm finding out with taking all these common sense, natural things is keeping my immune system from getting hurt any further to where I can't deal with all the things that keep popping up. And believe me, a lot of stuff pops up. I had 6 months, my sinuses, they wouldn't open up for anything. I've never had allergies before. Finally, with the silver, the neem, the moringa, the cell food, just a combination of just getting all these things, my immune system finally dealt with it. So that's all I can suggest to anybody, Robert, is there's no magic cure. There's no magic pill. What it is common sense, and give your body what it needs to survive, and you'll make it.
Okay. Well, there you go. I've been telling people that if you want to be here on this planet now, it's a commitment. You need to want to stay, and a lot of people don't. A lot of people say they've had it, they've had enough, they can't handle it, they can't take it anymore. They want to get off the ride, and I completely understand that. So, when we get into where we are right now, finding out how to stay healthy, how to keep your kids healthy as well, these are all very important things. So being here is a commitment. And Michael, I'm certainly thrilled that you've made the commitment to be here with the rest of us during this time, and really happy and glad you made it to the show today.
Well, I am too. It's been a while. I kind of took a long sabbatical. Other things came up, as you know. So
yeah, you had
when I'm done with that, and I take care of the corruption that's touched our family, then maybe it's time for Blog Talk Radio again.
Okay, Michael, you're always welcome here, and anything I can ever do to help you, you just let me know. I mean it.
Well, I know you mean it, and thanks for being a good friend. And you're one of the few that when you learned of what happened with my son, that your genuine care was there, and I could feel it. And we've never met face to face, but I felt it, brother. So thank you for caring and loving as you do.
All right. Well, my heart goes out to you, and take care of yourself, and we'll see you soon. Okay?
Okay.
Okay. Bye, Michael.
Bye-bye.
That's Michael Edward, and we've been talking about the Blue Plague and what's happened in the Gulf of Mexico. And if you are unaware, Michael's son was murdered a few months back in the state of Georgia, and his son was an adult and married at the time. And I don't want to get into too much of it because there's a lot of very intense kind of legal hooks and angles that are associated with it. But Michael has had to kind of take justice into his own hands and deal with a very corrupt system in order to bring his son's life and death to closure. And I can't even begin to imagine what that's like. So that's what he was talking about at the beginning of the show. And I just want to thank Michael for taking time out and being able to share that with people, because people do know that it happened, but they may not have been informed as to where it might be. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play some music and maybe change the tone and change the mood a little bit, and so we can get into our next incredibly depressing subject, which is Fukushima. Look, I am bringing this to the show because you people need to know. You need to be aware. You've got to understand what's going on. Because when you do, you can make choices. You can align your life in a way to bring the quality of your life to a standard that at least allows you to stay healthy to the best of your ability. I was in the chat room, and I saw Erica was talking about, she's eliminated produce from the West Coast. She's eliminated produce from Florida. And dairy too, from both places. So she's consciously trying to find food sources, or perhaps even grow her own food. Maybe that's the next step, for her family. And I think these are the types of choices we can make if we're informed. And this is why I brought Michael onto the show. And if you are living in Florida and you are sick, you may want to look at the 3 substances that he mentioned: neem and cell food and moringa. Perhaps that can help you and get you through your whatever it is you're going through, your healing crisis. And trust me, I have clients that I talk to. In fact, I talked to one yesterday. She's got skin issues. She's got things going on that she can't seem to address and vanquish. So this is another reason why I brought Michael on. So it's not all doom and gloom, although it is a heavy It's a heavy vibe. There's no way you can parse it. But at least you know. And it's better to know than not. You can make choices based on that. Okay, let me play a little bit of music, and I got to go track down RadChick because I think she thinks I'm calling her, which means that I'm going to have to go find her number, which I can find quite easily, but it's going to take me a little while. So why don't we play some music, and let's see, what is this? I have no idea what it is, but I think it should give me enough time to find her. It's called Immersion, and it's 2 minutes and 47 seconds long. Let's find out what it is. I'll play it. If it's not cool, I'll stop it. This is Robert Phoenix, and you're listening to the Friday FARcast. Well, that was a cool little respite, wasn't it? That was Immersion. I think that might be Richard Mystical's son. And if it's not, I apologize. Okay, why don't we do this? Let's bring on our intrepid reporter tracking every movement all the way from Fukushima. Actually, she's not in Fukushima. She's from Michigan, but it starts in Fukushima and radiates outward. It's RadChick. Let's bring her on right now. Hello, RadChick.
Hey, Rob. Hi.
Hello. What's happening?
Happy Friday the 13th.
Yeah, back at you. We got into this a little bit with Michael. It's not really a bad day. It's just a bad day because, well, some people said that it was going to be a bad day a long time ago when the Knights Templar got basically killed off, for the most part, in the south of France in 1307. But other than that, it's just another day. But for you, every day is not just another day. Every day is a day of discovery as you find more and more interesting things from Japan and Fukushima, and we're here to talk about the latest. Let's get into it. They've got the ice wall that they're proposing to build. What can you tell people about that? Is it legit? Can it work? Or is it just another kind of smokescreen for Fukushima?
Well, it's legit as far as, experimental contamination goes. They've never done anything like this before except in Tennessee at Oak Ridge, where they also used it experimentally. But the plan that TEPCO is considering, and they're actually talking about the feasibility of it right now with a commission that they formed, and whether or not, it could even possibly work, because their idea is to actually freeze the ground almost a mile down underneath the plant, which makes you wonder, gee, why do they need to go so far, especially when they won't tell us where the corium is. But what I'm hearing from soil experts is that this is a really bad idea, that this could possibly destabilize the ground further. And, one of the reasons that they want to do this is to help the situation, the swampy ground situation that they have going on there, that they only admitted to a few weeks ago. And, as you've probably seen in the last 3 or 4 weeks, every nuclear expert is now coming out and saying, oh, wow, this really is bad. And, at first it was kind of exciting to see this kind of interest all of a sudden, thinking that will lead to, possible, ways to mitigate or fix this disaster. But, they still, even with all the experts that are coming out and saying this is really bad, I'm still not getting truth from a lot of these people, the ones that are going on CNN and BBC and all the different news organizations. They're still not telling the truth of how bad things are over there. And for example, the spent fuel pool in the Reactor 4 building, they've equated that if something happened to that fuel pool, which, we already had a partial meltdown in that pool, and it caught fire and it ran out of water back in March of 2011, which was already worst case scenario. But if the whole pool went up, they equated that to 18,000 Hiroshima bombs. And that's just not correct. It more likely is millions or billions of Hiroshima bombs, because the bomb that we dropped on Hiroshima only contained uranium, and this pool contains MOX fuel and plutonium. So the lethality of that event is much greater than what these experts are saying. And 18,000 sounds bad, but it's actually probably a lot higher. And I know that there are some people who are actually working on the exact calculations for that right now. And so, we're getting this trickle of truth here and there, but it's still not the whole story. And, there's Ken Buessler from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute has said, there's no risk to the fish. Go ahead and eat up. They're not glowing yet. This was his quote in National Geographic about a week ago, and I mean that is just wrong. Kids should not be eating this at all. Kids should not be eating seafood, and they shouldn't have been eating seafood for the last 2 years. Yeah. And the whole idea of this is because it's never ending. This is now completely contaminated our environment, even if the levels are low, although our government, has raised them just astronomically in the past year or so. This contributes to your system over your lifetime. And children are 10 to 20 times more susceptible, and babies are 1,000 times more susceptible. And so the saying that, the fish is okay right now, I mean, there's just no way they can know that, because they haven't done nearly the amount of testing that they need to do, and they're not taking into consideration that we are going to be continually exposed to this for the rest of our lives, and so are our kids. And generations beyond that, too.
Yeah, it's completely insane to say, go ahead and eat it. It's not glowing yet. So I guess when we begin to see the fringe of the glow start to take place, well, that's a good time to really say, to push ourselves away from the table and say enough is enough. How do people get away with this?
Well, because it's perpetuated by, the mainstream media. It's fact. And then, we have, of course, all the consumer, indications that we need to keep our buying and spending and eating and everything, at a pace that continues to escalate to support this horrific economic situation that we have. So, I mean, they don't want people to stop eating fast food. They don't want people to stop eating fish. They don't want them to do any of these things because that's going to have a negative effect on a lot of economic factors. And that's what all of this is about, you know, that and depopulation. And we talked about this on your last show, too. You know, I mean, I didn't even want to believe any of that. But at this point, especially when you see that they're allowing the Olympics to be held in Tokyo, which was heavily contaminated at the beginning of the disaster and still is, you know, it's just so beyond insane at this point, beyond bizarre to watch this, you know, Zionist circus that's going on here to keep people in the dark and try to keep them from realizing the extent that this is going to have on all of our lives. Mm-hmm. And, you know, there's even, you know, musings now because of some of the stories that have come out, some of the shock from people that they would allow the Olympics to be held there in 2020, that they might actually take the Olympics from Japan if this plant doesn't get under control. And it's not under control, and it's probably never going to be unless new technology is invented or shared with that company. And that's really the only hope that, you know, we have at this point. And, you know, outside of that, a lot of this is completely beyond our control, except what we do in our daily lives to contribute to our sanity and our health. And, you know, when you realize what a devastating impact that this disaster is going to have, and, you know, how we're being exposed to contamination, and we're heavily exposed at the beginning of this accident. We still don't know how bad that is, and I don't know that we ever will, because the information would have to come from TEPCO, and they need to stop lying. You know, we're getting it in water, we're getting it in rain, it's in our soil, it's in our crops. We don't have the sophisticated equipment that we need because it would cost thousands and thousands of dollars to buy that, to be able to test this stuff. So, you know, a lot of us are just left in the dark, and, you know, people who have any kind of instinct of survival or self-preservation have taken it upon themselves to, you know, go as far as growing their own food indoors, realizing that this is never ending. This is technology that should not be used anywhere because there is no way to clean it up when it goes bad.
Yeah, you think about, you go back in time and you think about that big experiment that is still kind of ongoing, by the way, in Arizona called Biosphere. Remember Biosphere 1?
Yeah.
And you think about that, and now, kind of in retrospect, you understand kind of what they were doing there. It was like they were, you know, they were planning for this time. They were actually kind of working it out to try to create a sustainable ecosystem that could stand apart from some kind of disaster. And I'm not saying natural disaster. I'm talking about a disaster, either radiation or the microbial stuff that Michael was talking about earlier. It feels like that's what they were doing. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about
that's only going to be a benefit to very, very few, you know, people.
Exactly.
Who can
do that.
So, you know, they were trying to find, how are they going to live through this?
Right.
Sure.
Let's talk about the bluefin tuna. What's the latest? I've been seeing some stuff about the bluefin tuna and getting some testing. What are the current levels in the bluefin tuna?
Well, the current levels, I don't know if that has been made public at this time. I know that Stanford University had published data as far back as August. Well, they didn't publish, actually, until 2012, the end of 2012, but it was from fish samples that they took in August of 2011, showing that every tuna that they tested had radiation from Fukushima, but they didn't specify what type of radiation, what exactly was found in those fish or the levels. They said that it was safe for human consumption. But again, you know, the wording of that is not taking into account that for people who eat fish on a regular basis, they're going to be exposed and exposed and exposed over and over and over again. And the levels that we have are set for, and these include the ones that are set by the EPA, are for either a one-time lifetime exposure or a yearly exposure. So that level might be safe, in essence, if you only ate fish once a year or once in your life.
So
that's where everything gets tricky, you know?
For 1 year, that's fast. That's sad is what it is. I used to love fish.
Me too. I used to eat sushi a couple times a week, and I've had it less than 5 times probably since Fukushima happened. And, you know, I'm still sick. I still have some significant health problems that I'm dealing with. I actually had to stop doing my radio show because of it, and I'm going through 8 weeks of vitamin C IVs right now to try to fix my immune system, because my immune system is almost non-existent right now. And this started for me back in October of last year, where I had just, you know, pneumonia and then infected teeth and, you know, other problems, just infection after infection. And I haven't really been able to recover from that, but I have a really good doctor right now that's working with me, and we're trying some different things. And then, you know, I have other researchers that I talk with that have also made suggestions. But, you know, the people that are going to be most affected or affected the soonest are those who were exposed significantly in the first couple months after the accident. Maybe they work outside, or they were, you know, like myself, I was moving at the time, so I was outside quite a bit during that time period. People who already have immune disorders, or the elderly, or little kids.
Right.
And, you know, the numbers that came out of the Sherman-Mangano study reflected that those...
Oh, there we go. She's dropped off. Let's see if she comes back again here soon. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, right? Sometimes it's just the phone went into maybe a different region, a different patch, and that the signal just went away. Perhaps that's what it is. Or perhaps it might be something completely different. Let me see if I can get her back on. I do have her number here. Let's try this. Let me dial this out. Oh, she's back. Good deal. Good deal. Hey, you're back.
Hi.
Hi. So that was nothing conspiratorial, right? Your phone, you just dropped that, right?
I didn't do anything, but I'm kind of used to it. It's an annoyance, really, to have like your computer crash and your Skype crash and your phone cut out. A week or so ago, my entire hard drive was wiped out, and my computer, I lost like 2 years worth of data.
Did you recover it?
I am in the process of doing that now, because I have like 20 different places where everything was backed up. So I don't even really pay attention to that anymore. I back everything up, and now I have another computer that somebody sent me to use just some of the hard data and images that we've been collecting and papers and so forth. But we're gonna have more of these studies coming out. There was another one that was released fairly recently about a 28% increase in thyroid abnormalities for babies that had been born on the West Coast. I mean, this is just the beginning. You know, it'll be 5 or 10 years before we really can start getting a handle on this and appreciate some of the trends that we're seeing in terms of health and mortality and so forth. So, you know, in the meantime, you know, what I just recommend to people is just live a really, really healthy life as much as you can.
Yes, I totally agree. And it's getting harder and harder to do that. But, I think the stakes are high, and let's hope the rewards are just as high for sticking around and being at the after party, so to speak. So you lived in Portland originally, didn't you?
No, I've always been in Michigan, and I lived overseas for a while when I was a child because my parents work.
Okay,
I
thought you were connected with Portland.
No. Mm-mm.
So when you say you were exposed to the radiation because you were outside and moving, that took place in Michigan?
That took place in Michigan, and at the time, I had already been paying attention to the accident because I have people in my family that work for the nuclear industry, and I knew, what was happening at the beginning. The most stunning thing that was revealed while the news organizations were still covering it is that there were 13 neutron beam events that happened all over the plant grounds within a few days of the accident, and I knew that meant all the reactors had been breached. And it was like a day or two after that it dropped out of the news completely, and everybody was reporting the plant is stable, and I'm like, oh, hold on a second. This isn't possible. Why are they not talking about this? There's something really horrific going on there. And, I got rid of my TV right after that because I didn't want to waste time watching CNN and trying to learn anything about this. I realized the only truth I was going to get is by trying to investigate it for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so we made that decision to get rid of the TV, and we've never gotten it back. I don't really want to, and my kids are actually fine with it now, too. At first, they were pretty resistant. But so my focus has just been completely on the accident for the first few months, and then as I started studying the Chernobyl accident, and I realized the fallout effects on health and the effects of radiation on health, my focus kind of shifted to that. And around the same time, I also noticed mutations that started appearing in the plants around me. And I had a metallic taste shortly after the accident, too, while we were in the process of moving. And that was also reported all over the Pacific Northwest, that people were tasting metal. And it's actually when your body is bombarded by neutrons, your body creates something called substance P. So in essence, like you're tasting fission. And so I actually had that symptom almost right away, and I knew from working years in the medical field that could only really come with being injected with a radiological substance to have like an X-ray or a CAT scan done or something along those lines. So it wasn't something normal that would happen from anything that you ate or drank, in your daily life. And I've actually had that metallic taste recently, again, in the last few weeks, and we've had a number of events at Fukushima where there's been steam coming from reactor 3. It's happening again today. It was reported by Fukushima Diary. They did some infrared images of that reactor building. It shows that there's something hot in there that may be having a criticality, and that's also been reflected in some of the sludge measurements from the surrounding prefectures. There was a huge recent increase in iodine, and so that means that there's fission that's going on, and it'll keep doing this off and on, for 20, 30 years, if not longer. That stuff is 3,000 to 5,000 degrees underground, and it constantly goes through like a waxing and waning, where it gets hot and then it gets a crust and it cools a little and then it breaks free again, and it releases all these things that are measurable around Japan. But I've talked to other researchers too. Lorraine Murray, I spoke to her last night. She's in Berkeley, California, and she's having some of the same symptoms as well as some other researchers too. And hair loss and things seem to be kind of firing up again.
Yeah.
So we're just going to hit the mitigation a little bit harder, and use like topical iodine and things like that. And she suggested too that I start making my own spirulina drink and she's going to be sending me a recipe for that. And I started drinking kombucha recently, which I've been telling everybody, try this. Stuff makes you feel really good. And this is, people in China and Russia drank this for centuries because they knew of its health benefits. So, there's lots and lots of things that we can do in our daily life to help mitigate for this. And, it's kind of a constant, research just on that aspect alone of what works for people around Chernobyl. What did they do? Because there were lots of people who lived in highly contaminated areas, and they may have had their thyroids out or something like that, but, they're still okay, so to speak. And so, what is it that they did, and, what are they still doing today? And can we use those things to help mitigate for that here as well?
Yep. So I heard that they were drinking kombucha in Russia. Is that true?
Yeah. Everybody used to drink that in Russia before World War II, and then because of the sugar shortage, people stopped making it because you need sugar to help feed the growth of the bacteria in this drink that you can, ferment and make yourself. And so because of the sugar shortage, people got away from it. Yeah.
I was watching this show called River Monsters, and the guy who Jeremy was kind of on the hunt for the Loch Ness monster. So he went to Loch Ness to see, what he could find, talk to the locals and all that stuff. And he said something during that show which I thought was really interesting. In Loch Ness, they only fish kind of around the shore and not too far out, because the deeper you go out into the lake, you begin to run into Chernobyl contamination in Loch Ness. Have you heard this?
No, I've never heard of this.
Yeah, so...
But 40% of Europe was heavily contaminated from Chernobyl, and we had large areas in the United States that were as well. In fact, 40,000 people died in the first 8 months after the disaster in the United States in terms of excess mortality, a mortality that was above and beyond what they expected it to be, which could be attributed to Chernobyl. Of course, the government will never admit that. This is just, what you can draw from the data. So we experienced that heavy fallout situation here, and someone sent me a LA Times article from 1986 where they had said that monitors were picking up Chernobyl fallout in Portland and the Seattle area shortly after the accident. And so you can still find, articles about that online, although here, they really didn't talk about any of that. I think Michio Kaku did. He went on, I think it was CNN, where he was saying, they're finding radiation in milk in New York City right now. And, they always cut him off as soon as he, really gets going on talking about it. They're kind of like, well, thanks for coming on our program right afterward.
Right.
So, it's something that will continue to happen as we have, rain out across the United States from air masses that are coming over from Japan. We have the initial blasts from the reactors that actually went very high up into the atmosphere that circle the Earth about every 40 days and will continue to rain out. And, there hasn't been any kind of restriction on any kind of outdoor activities and, recess at schools. I mean, nobody is just taking this seriously at all. And it's really horrible because, there's so many little things that even if schools just kept kids in after it rained, some of these short half-lived particles that fall out are actually the most dangerous kind, the ones that are only around for a very short period of time. And it's what a lot of us have picked up on our own Geigers. I had the highest reading that I've ever had since Fukushima happened about 4 weeks ago after a rainstorm in Michigan, and my Geiger hit 1,800 CPMs off the hood of my car, and within 24 hours it had completely decayed out. This
Wow.
is nuclear fission. This is not radon. This is not, anything else. This is coming from either Fukushima or from a plant around here that's leaking that no one's talking about.
Right. What's a good Geiger counter or rad meter cost these days?
A good one, a really good one, about $3,000.
Okay.
One that would actually break down the isotopes, although you can get them for a lot less. You can get a PRM 9000 for, I think, like $600. That's a really good Geiger. The one that I have right now is a Soaks that I paid like less than $200 for, but it is a very crude instrument. It only picks up about 2% of what's there. So when you get a high reading, in reality, it's probably much higher than what you're actually picking up.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever used it for things like green tea or fish from Japan? Have you ever taken those readings yourself?
I've taken it to the grocery store with me a number of times, and I've gotten 3 to 4 times over background on salmon. That's always what I've been most curious about. And then, you talk to the guys at the fish counter, and they have kind of a standard answer. Oh yeah, we're testing the fish and everything's fine. And if you talk to somebody else, they'll say the exact same thing. And I'd like to know how the tests are being done, where they're being done, and what exactly is the breakdown of what they are finding. And what kind of radioisotopes are they finding? And they're, as long as it's falling within the EPA guidelines, I guess they're probably only testing a very small amount of the fish that they're selling.
Right.
Maybe 1 out of 20, and it needs to be done on every fish. And I think the results should be shared with everyone and posted.
Right. And I'm sure, and I'm just kind of riffing here, that there are probably different parts of the fish which would show different readings on the radiation. For example, maybe the fatty tissue of the fish might be higher than, say, a less fatty or less meaty portion, by the tail or near the bone or something like that. So they could even be quite selective, even where in the fish they're testing, right?
Right, exactly. And there's certain things that will concentrate. Radioisotopes like cesium, for example, will be more concentrated in the heart, and the muscle. Plutonium would be more concentrated in the stomach lining. Strontium would be more concentrated in the bone. So, this is like a really complicated science that, like, someone who really knows what they're doing needs to be testing this stuff. But then, of course, what they do find, if they have to report it, this is going to affect their bottom line, and none of the...
There she goes again, dropping off into the ethers one more time. But she'll be back. She is resilient, if anything. You're listening to RadChick on the Friday FARcast. This is Robert Phoenix, your host, and hopefully she'll be on here in just a moment or two, and we're talking about Fukushima and the fallout and the effects of Fukushima, especially as it relates to fish and other products. And there she is again. Let's bring her right back on. There you are again.
Here we are again. And my basic thought, I don't know what point I got cut off there, but and any contamination that they're going to find in the fish, I think their biggest concern is what's going to affect their bottom line. It's not the health of their customers at all, and there aren't any companies in existence right now that can have anything interfere with their bottom line, the money that they're making.
That's right, absolutely. One of the things you talked about, I don't think you talked about it in the show last time, but you mentioned it to me, which I thought was kind of interesting, and I'd like to bring it up. You talked about the effects of radiation with pilots and stewardesses, but more importantly, some of these, these stars, these actors, actresses, musicians who travel a lot by plane and some of the illnesses they've been reporting to people. Do you want to get into that a little bit?
Oh, sure. They could all be radiation related for sure. And I had a atmospheric fallout expert that I interviewed about this, Loren Murray. And we collected stories because we'd been corresponding for quite a while. And I said, you know, Loren, I'm starting to see like sudden heart attacks in athletes in the UK, on the West Coast, even kids that have like died during swim practices, and a lot of, you know, weird stuff. And she said, well, let's start collecting these stories and revisit this back, you know, in a couple months from now, and see if we can determine what's going on. And so there were a number of stars who were either like on tour or because of their promotional things that they're doing, they're flying a lot. Kim Kardashian flew dozens of times, even transatlantic and transcontinental flights while she was pregnant, which is already a big no-no.
Right.
You know, when you're pregnant to be flying that much. And then, you know, what actually happened to her about a month after Loren and I did this interview is that she delivered her child, I believe it was 6 weeks early, and the baby was significantly underweight. It weighed less than 5 pounds. And the reason she had to deliver early, they induced her labor, is because her liver was shutting down. And I mean, that's not a normal thing to happen during a pregnancy. And so she had significant exposure from flying that she was doing, and you know how that will affect her child in the long run will depend on what she was exposed to during the gestation. Like first month, the baby is going through, you know, extremely rapid cell division. In the second trimester, months 4, 5, and 6, the baby goes through organogenesis, where the organs are forming. And in the last trimester, 7, 8, and 9, that's when the baby's brain is forming. So, you know, if she was hit with significant exposure during the late term in her pregnancy, you know, that may manifest itself in brain or behavioral problems in the child as it gets older. A couple other people, Lil Wayne, the rapper, Dwayne Michael Carter, I think his real name is, he suffered seizures multiple times that actually occurred while he was flying on planes. They had to reroute his plane to take him to the hospital, and then after he was treated in the emergency room for the seizure, he went on another flight to continue his journey, and he had another seizure in flight. And it was revealed later after his hospitalization, and he almost died from this. This didn't come out until a few weeks later when he gave an interview, I think it was to The Guardian, it was to a UK paper, that his heart functioning had decreased to 30% of what is considered normal while these seizures were happening.
Wow.
Kelly Osbourne, who hosts a TV show called Fashion Police, she is the child of Ozzy Osbourne. She suffered seizures actually during a show that she was taping and was hospitalized. And I just saw that her brother, his wife was expecting a baby. They live in California, and the wife lost her baby. She had a late-term miscarriage, a miscarriage that occurred in the last trimester of her pregnancy, just a few days ago. Justin Bieber, who flies a lot, also was acting out in very strange ways, which a lot of people said, well, it could be drug use, it could be this, it could be that. But, you know, if you're using drugs or you're drinking, you're putting your body in a weakened state already as it is. So you're going to be more susceptible to things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were a couple of stars, Brooke Burke, who just had her thyroid removed. Another woman, I can't remember what her name is, from Sports Illustrated, swimsuit model, she just had her thyroid removed. And I mean, we're just going to see more and more of this as time goes on, especially if these people keep living on the West Coast and they're feeling exposed and they're flying in planes and their diets are horrible because, you know, they're always so busy, so they're not taking any kind of, like, protective measures to mitigate for their exposure. We're just going to see the same kind of sickness. And yesterday my daughter found an article for me because they love Twilight, and this actress from Twilight, Kristen Stewart, was photographed with like big bald patches on her head.
Oh my God!
Recently, and so there was a picture of her, where you could clearly see that she has significant hair loss, and she lives in California and she flies all the time.
Wow.
I mean, you have all these like little clues which are really not normal for people, especially someone like her age. I think she's in her early 20s. She shouldn't be losing hair like this. Right.
Unless she's trying to shave her head and break her Illuminati spell like Britney Spears. Nick Cannon is another guy that got really sick. He was,
Nick Cannon has some really severe problems.
He nearly died.
He almost died. He had he actually was doing a TV show and a radio show, and he's pretty much dropped out of sight because he's needed to attend to his health problems. But he spent an extended time in the hospital, and he had like multiple organ failure, which again, in somebody who's in their 20s is highly unusual.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to ask you about is, I was talking with a friend of mine, Katie Galante, in California, and she was mentioning to me that there seems to be an increased rate of women in California going through menopause at a much earlier age. Have you tracked this at all?
No, that I haven't, but I will pay attention to it now.
You may want to look into this because they're actually saying that there's something different. They're reframing. I forget the name that they're using, but they're reframing this in a way that it's not the change of life at the age of 30 or 35. That's something else. But there's a rash of women who are going through this now. It's troubling. It's really troubling, to be honest with you.
That's interesting, and thyroid problems. A thyroid, although it seems like overall kind of an insignificant gland, you can't live without it, and it actually regulates all of your endocrine functions. So it would make sense to follow that would affect hormones and so forth. And I'll have to look into that further, and I'll share that with Loren. Thanks for bringing that up. That's just how one conversation can lead you down a whole nother, avenue of data and research. And I'll see what I can find out about that, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if that's what's happening.
So the last time you talked, you mentioned that you've been collecting all these really strange and fascinating photographs of mutations. Have you gotten any new ones that are really kind of mind-blowing and interesting?
Yes, and we probably get 3 or 4 submissions a day from around the United States. In fact, there's a page on Facebook that's dedicated to this. There's actually a couple pages. My page is called Mutation Watch, and there's another page that another researcher just started called Post-Fukushima Mutations. That's actually a group that you have to be approved for, where they're generating a lot of discussion and posting things. My page is just for people to upload pictures of things that they come across, and now with the produce season in full swing, we're getting lots of squash and apples and oranges and things like that, and lemons. Most of it is coming from the West Coast, the northern tier states, and the Midwest. But we also get images from Canada quite frequently and from Europe. And what we're doing is just creating the largest database in existence of mutation images that hopefully will be of benefit to someone one of these days. I do have a few people that wrote that contacted me because they wanted to do their dissertation or their thesis on this. So they had been, I just sent them all the data that I had so they could put papers together to discuss this. And it's really the only physical evidence that we have. It's very difficult to prove that this is from radiation because the plants can be affected even if they don't have direct uptake. So, for example, if you came across a plant and you cut it and dried it out and saved it, and then later had somebody analyze it, they might not find any radiation, so to speak, in the plant because it could be just from something lying on the ground or in the soil next to the plant that damaged its DNA. But mutations always occur from environmental factors. And, like your last guest, Michael, was talking about too, Corexit. I mean, we have so many contaminants in our surroundings now. And the real big problem is that when radiation combines with some of these contaminants, you get what's called a multiplier effect, where it's 10 or 100 or 1,000 times more damaging to DNA because it's mixed with a chemical. So when you have radiation and a chemical, and these two things come together and affect an organism, the effect it has on that organism is much more profound than it would be if it was just affected by radiation or just affected by Corexit. You see what I'm saying?
I do. I get it. Yeah. So, can you want to mention some of the oddities that have come across your path recently?
Sure. What we know about all these things from studying the plants and animals around Chernobyl, and there's basically just a few categories of things that manifest themselves in plants that have been exposed to nuclear products. One is albinism, albinos, or a complete lack of pigment in an animal or plant. When my daughter just came home the other day, she took a picture of a white squirrel, and we actually went back to the neighborhood where she found it with a bag of nuts to see if we could get some better pictures of it. And we didn't find the white squirrel, but we saw two other squirrels that had tumors all over its legs.
Oh, no.
So we took pictures of that. The people from a gentleman in New York just recently sent me images of birds that have like sections of feathers that are completely white, sparrows and Canadian geese. So that's something that can manifest itself, and that happens in plants as well. Something called gigantism, where a tree will grow some leaves on it that are much, much bigger than what is normal for the tree. And I've noticed that in all different kinds of trees around here, and there's pictures on Mutation Watch of that also. And fasciation, which is where when the plant is growing and there's like a columnar growth of cells so that like a stem is round, instead it will branch in two different directions and create kind of this like flattening of the stem. Instead of the stem looking round like a pencil, it'll look like a flat garden hose. And sometimes that'll actually come all the way up through the bud of the flower. And we have lots of pictures of that happening in daisies, in echinacea, and corn. That's called fasciation. And then twinning, or like conjoining, where you have like a flower head that's double. There's two like separate flower heads that actually look fused together, and we're seeing a lot of that in fruit and in plants that grow really fast, where they're trying to split into two separate organisms. And of course that can happen in babies as well. There was just a set of conjoined twins born in Texas that actually had a surgery to split them, and I don't know what the status is of those infants right now. I haven't had any updates, but that's kind of the basics of the mutations. And colors can also be affected from radiation, where you'll have like a rose or a flower that would normally be pink, and instead it's split right down the middle, and like half of it's pink and half of it's white. We've been seeing some of that too.
So I guess we'll know the end is near when we have a gigantic albino set of twins that are born. What do you think?
I think it'll definitely become more obvious with time, because we have the stuff that we know is laying around on the ground everywhere, even the USGS admitted to that, and it's on their website. They detected fallout in every sample that they took across the United States in March and April of 2011, and then they shut down the testing, and they haven't updated it since. And all these things need to be tested, and they're going to need to be tested on a regular basis forever, because there's no way to shut that plant off. At least right now there isn't.
Oh, man. Wow. We only have a few minutes left. Let's cover the bases and find out, let people know where they can find out more about your work. Fukushima Facts is one of your websites, right?
Right. We're building a new website which will be highlighting all the mutation stuff, and it'll have an interactive map where people can upload images directly to a Google Earth map and put in their information so that they'll get proper credit when their images are used by researchers. And we'll also be categorizing them according to what type of mutation they are. It's going to be really fabulous. And the thing that I'm most interested in seeing with this map is how this map correlates to rainfall. Because the areas that have drier climates are less affected than the areas where it rains a lot. So we have that. We have a Facebook page called RadChick, Radiation Research and Mitigation. And we hit anywhere from 100,000 to 500,000 people a week just with that one web page, Facebook page. And then the Mutation Watch page. And I have a couple of blogs that I visit frequently because I think the researchers do excellent work. Fukushima Diary. Bobby One's Optimal Prediction would be another one. And a gentleman from Australia has one called Fukushima Emergency, What Can We Do? That's an excellent blog. And then, of course, ENE News, which is like the Drudge Report of radiation. It's a news aggregate where they pull in stories from Japan, Europe, the U.S., and Canada on a daily basis. They post 4 or 5 of the top stories that ran, so I pay attention a lot to that page as well.
Now, you also have a number of YouTube videos with you and Laurent Moret. Is that right?
Yeah, my YouTube channel is RadChick, and we have there's quite a few different categories on there. What a lot of people enjoy the most are the interviews that I did with Laurent, because she is so wonderful at explaining everything that is happening now, from the time that she spent working in the nuclear weapons lab and studying Hiroshima and now the Fukushima accident. We have an interview that we did that's 6 parts on there at the 2-year anniversary. We have another one that we did about all the 6 celebrities. And there's also a playlist that contains all the mutation videos that people have sent to me, where they've gone around in their gardens and shot pictures of weird stuff that's growing. And so that's a real interesting one to take a look at too.
So you could just go to YouTube and type in RadChick in the search bar, and a lot of that stuff will come up. Hey,
there's also a.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go.
There's 117 radio shows that I did too, called Nuked Radio, where we start with the basics and try to teach people, everything that they could possibly want to know about the Fukushima accident and about radiation. So those are archived there too, and that's a real good series to listen to if you want to learn more about it.
You're such an amazing resource, and I'm glad we connected. And I'm looking forward to connecting with you again, and maybe doing something with you and John on a Google Hang, and John Trudell, and do a live video thing. That could be real. So listen, take care of yourself.
That would be amazing. And thank you so much for paying attention to this, because there's so few people who have covered this story, especially in depth like you have. So thank you for that.
We're here on the planet, and we have kids, and we're concerned about life here, so it's just a no-brainer. I hope the vitamin C drip works and you stay healthy and get healthy, because we need you. So take good care, and we'll catch up with you down the road, okay?
Thank you. You too.
Bye, RadChick.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay, that's it. We've only got 25 seconds left. We'll see you back on Monday. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to see open what's possible. Here's Philip K. Dick. Adios.
We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.